Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Nite, Voices of the Kronian Moon, out March 25th on Season of Mist. The album has 8 tracks, 37 minutes in length, and this is the band's second full-length studio album. They are an American blackened heavy metal band. The first thing I noticed about this record was how much it had in terms of progression from song to song. It's an album that feels very linear at times, straightforward, simple even, and it carries the listener from track to track seamless. There's almost no sense of pushing the listener from a song to song or creating mechanisms that allow the listener to connect better track in and track out. The album just really does everything for you. You just have to press play, and the movement that the record has, the ability that it has to engage with the listener and transport the listener across 8 songs, it's all done in a very seamless fashion. This obviously makes the overall experience feel more compact, feel more direct, feel more cohesive. Having 8 songs, 37 minutes doesn't hurt either, because it makes the album feel a lot shorter. Well, the album is not long, but the experience that you get is one that it feels even shorter. It feels even more together. All important attributes when you have a record that has a lot of similarities sung in and sung out. There's only a few nuances here and there to create some ripples, but not much in order of changing your overall perception of the record. So keeping the album short, compact is the right attitude, is the right way to go if you're going to create an album that never veers that far off the beaten path. As far as the soundscape is concerned, this album is definitely heavily influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal. You're going to see it in the sound, and you're going to see it at times a little bit in the atmosphere. Having said that, the atmosphere of this album is a lot darker. It's one of the darker elements with the vocals as far as the overall experience is concerned. But the thing that I took from the sound of this record is not what's influencing the record, is not what's influencing the album, is not what's influencing the band, but the quality that it has. The album has a very warm sound all around. It feels perhaps a little bit more analog than digital. It has a more organic approach, a more organic feel that has a very positive impact on how you're going to perceive the execution of the record itself. It also has a very positive impact on that dark atmosphere that this album creates. Because while having the roots in new wave of British heavy metal, this album also has some doom, obviously black metal elements, and even psychedelic. They're few and far between, but they are there. And those are the little ripples, the little nuances that really change ever so slightly the perception of the individual songs. But once again, the blanket that covers the whole album stays unhinged throughout the entire experience of listening to this record. Now, the 2 elements that I took away from this album was how incredible the guitar sound and execution was, and the vocal performance. I was expecting a little bit more from the drums. I felt like the drums at times felt too flat, like they didn't have enough substance, they didn't have enough texture. Not necessarily a problem overall, because it's a short, direct, guitar-driven album, so you have all the right ingredients there. But if you want to make some songs a little bit more noticeable or allow them to stand a little bit more outside of the pack, having some not necessarily heavier drums, but drums that have a little bit more of a thicker sound to them would allow the record to have more ebbs and flows, or at least more defined ebbs and flows, and not feel necessarily as linear from start to finish. But the guitar sound on this record, phenomenal. The guitar solos, outstanding. I really love the energy, the light that the melodies and specifically the solos bring to the overall experience of this album. Because like I said earlier, overall record has a very dark and somber atmosphere. You get it also from how the vocals are coming across, and you get it from some of the melodies within the guitar riffs. But the way the guitars push themselves forward, and once they reach those solos, the solos really open the doors and let the sun come in ever so slightly, breaking a little bit of the fog that exists, breaking a little bit of the darkness that surrounds every single track on this album. And because of that, you feel the energy that the guitars have. You feel the sense of direction. You feel the sense of purpose. You gravitate towards them, and you start to realize early on in this album how important they are to the overall construction of this record. Definitely the motor, the driver, the gas, the pedal, everything. They're pretty much everything as far as sound and as far as experience is concerned. Now, the vocals have something to say about that, because I really like the different approach that I discovered listening to this album. This is my first time listening to the band, so I wasn't sure what I was going to get coming into, and the vocals surprised me because they sounded very different. One of the darkness, more blackened elements that's really easy to determine, really easy to identify throughout the entire record. You see it in the vocals. A lot of the darkness comes from them, the way they have an impact into the lyrical content, how they bring the lyrical content into the forefront, allowing that mood, that atmosphere to become a lot more palpable. The vocal mix, the vocal tone, the vocal performance really becomes the second calling card outside of the guitars as far as the overall record is concerned. It's phenomenal. It has this deepness to it. It almost feels like an out-of-body experience, like the sound is in one room and the vocals are in a complete separate room. The two are not completely integrated with one another, and that becomes the essence of this record. That becomes the beauty of this album. It really gives it a life of its own. It really gives it a fingerprint of its own outside of other bands that are having the same sort of influences, the same sort of approaches. So I really like the overall vocals. There's not much changing from the first to the last song. The same thing that I said about the guitars. There are some nuances here and there from track to track in terms of how deeper into that dark hole they're going to go, but overall the vocal performance stays very consistent, very linear throughout the entire record. Now, all around, this is a consistent album. If there's one word to define it, that would be it. I think that in the long run, the only problem that this record has is that same consistency. It might be too much. After a while, it might seem like it's becoming harder and harder to tell the forest from the trees the deeper you get into this album. But the quality is undeniable. The consistency of quality across all 8 songs is undeniable. And this is not a record that lives off of 2 or 3 outstanding tracks. No, every song has the same sort of quality. Every song has the same sort of level of performance, making the album all around very grounded, very connected, very balanced. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Last Scorpion. Great guitar riff and melody. There are some great layers in the sound of this track that are really interesting because they create volume without necessarily having an impact on how heavy the song needs to be. And that's a very interesting attribute because they come in, they go out, they come in, and they go out, and you feel like the song has a little bit of a heartbeat in terms of how it moves, specifically when it comes down to the melody that it carries. It's a very melodic song, has a very strong melodic bass line to it, and that helps the overall definition of the track. The vocals are pure darkness, from start to finish. They help enhance the atmosphere that the sound is trying to create. But the shapes of that atmosphere, the darkness, the levels of darkness of that atmosphere, they're all defined by the vocal performance. Now, the guitars are phenomenal. I said that before. I'm going to say that about every single track. They're just outstanding in terms of how effective they are and what they're doing throughout the track, carrying the listener all the way through, giving you those ripples, those very small ebbs and flows, those small movements that make the overall track feel a lot more engaging, a lot more interesting. Next we have Liber ex Doctrina. This is my favorite track on the album. It has a characteristic that I don't think there are any other song on this record possesses. It has a very hooky and catchy chorus. I'm not saying that other tracks don't have that, but none of them has it as well defined as this song has. Perhaps one of the few songs that breaks a little bit out of the mold of everything else that surrounds it. But because it's in the middle of the record, it almost gets engulfed by everything else, and it becomes very hard for you to remember those key characteristics by the time you reach the end of the record. But if you're looking at this song on the individual basis, I love the doomy vibes that it has. I love the darkness that it has, the different levels of darkness. It's a song that dips really low, musically and vocally. It dips really low, like nowhere, no other song on this record dips to where this song is going, musically and vocally. And then it comes back up again once you reach the chorus, musically and vocally. Once again, more life, a little bit more energy, not necessarily bright, but definitely brighter than where it was in the verses. So a track that has great movement, but it's movement that doesn't feel volatile. It still feels very controlled. It still feels very connected, that you're having movement inside parameters. That's how this track comes across. But that gives it energy. That gives it a certain characteristics, like I said, that you're not necessarily going to find before or after it, making it a little bit more of a standout track and how it connects the beginning of the record with the end of the record. Last but not least, we have Thorns. This is a track that has great movement in terms of how it carries the listener all the way through. It still feels very controlled, but it definitely has a sense of progression to it. Great sound, great atmosphere. It has some psychedelic elements in the guitar tones and how they come across. They definitely make you feel like you're somewhere, having almost an out-of-body experience. In terms of how the sensation that it gives, the atmosphere that it creates, the sound that it carries, and then the vocals are just dragging you all the way through. The vocals have this deepness to them. They have this blanket of darkness that covers them that just doesn't really allow you to have movement. So they're just creating the movement for you, and that is a very slow movement. Now the guitars at times feel more penetrating, specifically when it comes to the solos. The solos have a little bit more brightness, something that stays consistent throughout the entire record, and we see it in this track. But maybe on this song we feel it a little bit more due to the design, due to some of the specific volatility that the guitars have throughout, becomes a little bit more noticeable. I really enjoy this track for how it moves, for how it feels, and having those slight psychedelic elements really creates something different for you to digest in this overall abyss of darkness that it becomes this record. This is it, Nite Voices of the Kronian Moon, out March 25th on Season of Mist. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.